Welcome back to the cryptoworld channel, everyone. My name is Josh, and right now this Bitcoin warning signal is still flashing on the chart while the price is breaking further to the downside in the short term, and this is potentially being caused by the US government dumping Bitcoin right now, while Ethereum is now running into critical short-term support. So I'll be talking about all of that and more later in the video, so definitely watch to the end. First of all, taking a look at the Bitcoin ETF news today, and just yesterday on the Monday, we actually saw a net outflow once again of around 85.7 million US dollars. And if we're looking at the breakdown, we can see a somewhat decent inflow into the BlackRock ETF, but that was just about it. We saw a relatively small inflow into the Fidelity ETF and almost no inflows into the other ETFs. Meanwhile, as usual, we saw the usual Grayscale outflow, this time of around $300 million flowing out of the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust just yesterday. And so once again, that outflow from Grayscale was bigger than any of the inflows that we saw from the other ETFs, which led to that net outflow yesterday of around 85 to 86 million US dollars leaving the ETFs. And in case you're new to all of this, basically if we're seeing net inflows, you can think of that as a buying pressure. That's money coming into Bitcoin, going to buy Bitcoin. But on the other hand, if we're seeing net outflows like what we saw yesterday, you can kind of think of that as selling pressure, because that's essentially money leaving Bitcoin, US dollars leaving Bitcoin, which essentially means selling Bitcoin. And so once again, this is potentially one of the reasons that caused the dump over the last one day in the price of Bitcoin. Once again, we saw that net outflow, which is technically bearish. And what we also saw only just a few hours ago was the US government just move around 30,000 Bitcoin worth around 2 billion US dollars. And they actually made a couple of transactions between a few of the US government Bitcoin addresses, but the main transaction that we're looking at here is between the US government, another US government address, and the Coinbase deposit address. And so basically, the US government moved a lot of Bitcoin from multiple different Bitcoin addresses, which, by the way, came from the Silk Road confiscated funds. And then they essentially got all of that Bitcoin and sent it in one transaction, but to two different addresses. One address being the Coinbase address. And so out of all of that Bitcoin, they sent around 2,000 Bitcoin worth around $130 million over to Coinbase, basically to dump on the market. And I'll talk more about that in just a moment. And the other approximately 30,000 Bitcoin, because they sent in total around 32,000 Bitcoin in this transaction. So the other 30,000 Bitcoin approximately went to another US government address that's just sitting there right now. And that amount they sent to Coinbase, that $130 million worth of Bitcoin that they sent to Coinbase, that's potentially this amount that they actually filed a notice to sell back in January. Because basically this came out in the news a couple of months ago. Basically the US government was saying they're about to sell around $130 million worth of Bitcoin sometime soon, which was linked to the Silk Road funds. And once again, we just saw pretty much exactly $130 million worth of Bitcoin flow from the US government addresses to Coinbase. And so once again, this is potentially the amount that they already organized to sell back in January. So potentially this was done via OTC because they already set up this transaction ahead of time. But with that being said, that does not change the fact that the US government right now is currently active with their Bitcoin holdings. And in case you're wondering, in total, the US government currently holds around $14 billion worth of Bitcoin, or around 1% of the total Bitcoin supply. And how we know this is because the Bitcoin blockchain, in case you're new to this, the Bitcoin blockchain is completely public. We can see every single address and every single transaction on the entire Bitcoin blockchain. And so, for example, when the Department of Justice releases a statement saying they seized so much Bitcoin from a certain address, we can now track that Bitcoin exactly where it goes forever because Bitcoin is public. And in my personal opinion, it would be very unwise for the US government to sell all of that Bitcoin, because obviously the US government can essentially print more dollars by issuing more debt, so they don't exactly need this for any money. And let's just say they do sell it, all that will do is cause short-term selling pressure. It would cause the price of Bitcoin to drop temporarily in the short term before eventually it will get bought back up again, and then the US government will have no Bitcoin. And so once again, even if the US government does dump that Bitcoin, that will just be good news for the rest of us, because we can accumulate cheaper Bitcoin while the US government is basically shooting themselves in the foot. But with that being said, getting into the Bitcoin charts today, looking at the weekly time frame, and right now the price is still struggling around that all-time high breakout level, which is sitting at around 69 to 70,000. But once again, as I've been saying here on the channel, this is very similar price structure to what we saw last time in the last bull market, and so it's no surprise that the price is struggling around this all-time high breakout level, because once again, we've seen it happen in the past, in past bull cycles. And so just keep that in mind. It is of course possible to see short-term bearish price action and short-term struggle in the price of Bitcoin even during a larger bullish market. And if we're taking a look at this 3-day Bitcoin chart, we can see so far throughout this very bull market that we've been in since basically the beginning of 2023, we've seen multiple pullbacks of around 20% or more. And so far, as of recording this video, from the current all-time high to the local low in this pullback, at least so far, we've pulled back around 18% in the current pullback. And obviously, it's possible we could go lower. I'm not saying that's definitely going to happen, but I am saying that it's very normal to see this type of price action even during a larger bullish trend. So just because we're seeing short-term pullbacks and short-term dumps here and there, that does not necessarily change the fact that we're still in a larger bullish market. And so in case you're new to all of this, it's just important to understand the difference between the different timeframes. Once again, on the larger timeframes, looking at the bigger picture, we can still look very bullish, even if on smaller timeframes in the short term, we might be looking more bearish. And with that being said, taking a look at the daily time frame, looking at the DXY, also known as the US dollar index, as of right now, this has been spiking to the upside, which is technically a short-term bearish signal for Bitcoin. And this is something that I mentioned in my last video here on the channel. Once again, as usual, when the DXY is bullish, that's often bearish for Bitcoin and crypto, and vice versa. If the DXY is bearish, that's usually bullish for Bitcoin and crypto. And so at least for the time being, while the DXY is bullish, once again, we should not really be expecting a lot of bullish momentum here in the price of Bitcoin, at least in the short term. And instead, I'd like to see more of a pullback start in the DXY in order to start flipping much more bullish again in the price of Bitcoin just in the short term here. Once again, these are talking about these short-term moves. Once again, I'm still very bullish on the larger trend at play, which can contain short-term bearish moves. And if we're zooming into the short term, looking at the 4-hour time frame, right now as of recording this video, the price of Bitcoin is running into some critical short-term support, which is sitting in between around 65,000 to 66,000. And so far, we're currently finding support there with a short-term bounce. But if we were to see a confirmed break well below $65,000, then in that case, we could potentially see a drop back down towards around 62,000 as the next short-term support in between around 61 to 62,000. But at the same time as the price currently running into this support at around 65,000, give or take, the 4-hour Bitcoin RSI is also entering into oversold territories. We've just done that recently. And if we're looking at the last couple of times where the RSI entered into oversold territories or got very close to oversold territories on the 4-hour time frame, these occurred right around some sort of local low in the price just before we saw a short-term bounce of some sort. And so once again, it is quite likely that potentially soon over the next 1 day or so, we could see a slight bounce from this support. Now, it doesn't mean that this is definitely the bottom of this correction, because once again, what we saw back here was a bounce over the next 1 to 2 days and then a further pullback later on. But once again, right now, we are due to see a bit of a short-term bounce, basically a bit of a break or relief from this short-term pullback. And now, if we do end up seeing a further bounce here in the price of Bitcoin, the next short-term resistance to watch out for is sitting in between 68,000 to 69,000, which was previous resistance and also temporarily acted as support. And so once again, it should be acting as important resistance. And above that area, we also have this line of resistance at around 71,500 that I mentioned recently on the channel is acting as strong resistance. And if we're taking a look at the 2-hour Bitcoin chart, obviously, as I said in my last video, we already confirmed a break to the downside below this line of support, which was sitting at around 70.3K. And so the moment we confirmed the break below that support with this candle close right here, that is the moment, as I said yesterday, that was the moment that we confirmed this technical price target to the downside in play, which was sitting at around 66,500. And obviously over the last 1 day, we already hit that price target and actually overshot that target. And so obviously, if you took this trading opportunity by, for example, entering a short position or selling Bitcoin around the breakout once we confirmed the break to the downside, and then either bought back that Bitcoin or closed or took profits from that short position right around the price target, obviously you would have done very well here in the short term. So even if we're dumping, you can actually profit from this price action. And personally, when I'm taking trades just like this, I trade over on Bybit, so I'll make sure to leave a link to Bybit in the description down below and in the pinned comment. And if you use that link to Bybit to make an account and deposit on that account, then you can get up to a $30,000 deposit bonus, but only if you use that link down below this video. But for whatever reason, if you cannot access Bybit or if you cannot KYC on Bybit, there is also Bitflex, which is another crypto exchange similar to Bybit, but you don't need KYC for Bitflex. And so I'll also leave a link to Bitflex down below this video. And if you use that link, it'll take you to this page right here where you can enter an exclusive Apple Watch giveaway just by trading crypto on Bitflex. And so if you're going to be trading crypto anyway, you might as well get set up ready to go on one of those exchanges using those links down below this video if you want to get those extra bonuses. And just giving you a quick update on my Bitcoin trade since I've talked about it recently on the channel, I did enter a long position on Bitcoin right around here at this breakout, and I already took profits out of that trade around here, as I've been saying over the last few days and here on the channel since back then. And so once again, I entered a long position right around here and then took profits out of that trade right around here. And then I also moved my stop loss for that trade into profits. And on this recent move to the downside, that hit my stop loss and closed that trade in profits automatically. And so even with the price dumping back to the downside, in the worst case scenario for a long position, I still made money from that trade by using good risk management, by taking some profits off the table around important resistance and having my stop loss in profits. And once again, if you want to take trades just like that, check out those links down below this video to those exchanges if you want to get those extra bonuses. And if we're taking a quick look at the Bitcoin liquidation heat map, we can still see a lot of liquidity, a lot of liquidations sitting right at around 72,000. And so once again, as I've been saying recently on the channel, once we finally see the price of Bitcoin cross even slightly above $72,000, that will liquidate billions of dollars of short positions, essentially causing a short squeeze in the market once we actually hit 72,000. And obviously between now and then, there is some resistance between the current price and that liquidation level. And as for liquidity to the downside, we do have a little bit of liquidity at around 64,500, but as of right now, it's not as much liquidity to the downside compared to what we have at around 72,000. And with that being said, taking a look at Ethereum on the weekly time frame, and right now the price of ETH is potentially breaking below this critical area on the chart, sitting in between around 3.4k to 3.5k. And so basically, if we confirm this break below 3.4k with a weekly candle close below that level, then that will be a signal telling us that we might be in for a slightly larger correction, potentially down towards around 2.9k. But once again, this is still talking about the somewhat short term. Even if we see a further correction here in the short term, we can still technically remain within a larger bullish trend because we've seen much larger pullbacks than that so far in this very bull market. And if we're zooming into the short term, looking at the 4-hour time frame, right now the price of ETH is actually bouncing from critical short-term support, sitting in between around 3.2k to 3250. And as I said in my last video just yesterday, when the price was all the way back up here, I said we were breaking below this level of support, and I said if we see a rejection from that level, confirming it as resistance, then expect a move down towards around 3.3k or potentially down to this support, which we've played out exactly as expected. And also at the same time as the price running into this short-term support, we have the RSI on the 4-hour time frame entering into oversold territories, which once again is at least a short-term signal telling us that we should be due to see some sort of bounce. But this signal by itself is not enough to confirm that actual low is in place, because obviously we've seen other times where we've seen the oversold signal. It's resulted in a short-term bounce, but we can actually go lower later on if we reset that RSI, giving us more room to the downside later on. And so once again, at the moment, we're simply looking more bearish than bullish in the short term. We are in a bit of a correction at the moment, but in the imminent short term, as in over the coming hours, maybe over the next one day, we're potentially due to see a bit of a bounce during this short-term correction, which once again is occurring within a much larger bullish trend on the larger timeframes. And if we're taking a look at Solana on the 2-hour time frame, right now we're actually bouncing from this ascending line of support, which is sitting at around $177 at the same time as the 2-hour RSI entering into oversold territories for the first time since around the 20th of March. And if we're looking at what happened back then in the price when the RSI was oversold on the 2-hour time frame, we saw a decent bounce back to the upside, so just keep that in mind. This RSI signal is relatively accurate, basically predicting short-term bounces. And also, due to the fact that the RSI entered into oversold territories, that's also basically a signal telling us that this bearish divergence has already played its part. It's already completely played out to the point where the RSI entered into oversold territories. But if the price actually breaks below 177 to 178, then in that case, we could see a move down towards around 167 to 168 as the next short-term support. And as for short-term resistance, in case we see a bit more of a bounce here, I would be expecting some resistance at around 191 to 193 and more resistance, a lot more resistance at around 199 to $200. And once again, if you want to trade these moves in the price of any crypto, check out those links down below this video to get those extra bonuses. And if you want to actually know how to trade crypto, no matter if the price is bullish, bearish, or chopping around sideways, then make sure to watch these videos popping up right here on your screen. The video in the top left shows you how you can profit from bullish or bearish price action using long positions or short positions. And the video in the bottom left shows you how you can easily profit from choppy sideways price action. But anyway, that is everything that I have to say for today. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all in the next video.